G'day folks, Mark here. I've got a video today answering a question that I get all the time, I suppose, and everyone sees on occasion around the place, but it's why doesn't my rifle shoot? Or what's wrong with my new rifle? And I get it in lots of different ways. I get it from whether it's trying to find the right ammo for it to shoot, or there's this problem, it's where there's a problem with the barrel. I've got a mark in the middle of the barrel and I've got to sort that out, or I bought this rifle here and it doesn't shoot any good. And I'm sure every gunsmith all over the world has to deal with a lot of gunsmiths and gun shops have to deal with a new rifle, doesn't shoot properly every day of the week. And what is it? Most of the time, it's not actually a rifle doesn't shoot properly, it's actually something else going on. There is occasions where it happens, but I want to go through some of the things that you should be checking before you go and take it back to the shop or to the gunsmith and make it someone else's problem. Because there's a bit of embarrassment comes down to where it's a case of this that you didn't see, that then it's all fixed and you go forward and listen, you didn't need to go there. Anyway, what are the things that you should be looking at? What should you look at with a new rifle in the way of what will make it shoot properly? Why does it not shoot when you go to use it? Well, there's a few things to start off with. The basics on a new rifle, second-hand rifle, particularly a rifle that's bought as a package in the shop. They're particularly going to be this case, but they can be in all formats. And that is, you check that it's done up. So yeah, you check the action screws. You check that the barrel's free floated. It's a finer detail, but the barrel is free floated. So get your dollar bill and run it down the sides of the barrel, or whatever you're doing there, a piece of A4 paper, whatever you want to use, and make sure that it's free floated. It's a good idea to do. Check the scope mounting right the way down to the rail to the top of the action. Every bit of that needs to be checked. If I buy a scope that's all a rifle that's all bolted together, it's not just to wriggle around your hand to see if it's okay. It really is, the simple thing to do is to pull it to bits and go through the likes of rail screws where you want your Picatinny rail to the top of your action. If it's all set up and it's all working otherwise, then it's a good idea to go undo them, pull them out one at a time. If they pull out, they've got a bit of Loctite on them, okay, you just check the tension, they're done. If they don't have any Loctite on it, then I'd put a bit of blue Loctite on it. I think it's the 243 Loctite, but a bit of a low yield Loctite to put them back in and tension them properly. Just make sure that they're all tensioned up properly of your rail, because it is something that can come loose. The level beyond that point, pull it off and put a bit of the Loctite underneath it so that you can actually make sure it's bedded properly to the action. But that goes into, and I'll show videos on that type of thing. The absolute least you want to do is check that they're up to tension. And then the same with the rings to the rail, and the same with the rings to the scope. Make sure everything is tight. Position properly, all that sort of stuff for sure. Focus your diopter properly, that's something, so focus your scope properly. That isn't the focus lever on the side, no, that's actually focus at the back, so the diopter, focus that properly, and then your parallax and everything should work properly. Those are important things to do. If you have a muzzle device, if you have other bits and pieces on this rifle, make sure they're tight, make sure they're located properly. Muzzle brake, suppressor, whatever it is, that it's done up properly. These are things that if you check all that, with a new rifle, or with any rifle actually, look down the bore. Make sure there's no dust or debris inside there. Not only can that cause issues with the first shot where it actually goes, but actually if there's a bit of something else in there, a bit of sand, a bit of grit, a bit of metal that's in that barrel that might have got there for some other reason in the packing, in the transportation, when it was stored, whatever it was, that could cause permanent damage to the barrel. So checking down there is a simple, sensible thing to do. So that's the first thing you should do in setting up to actually shoot it, to check for accuracy. I've been through a fair bit of the ways that I do that, but really this isn't what this video is about. It's about then you're going through and about to go through and use it at the range, the bits you also, or when you're going to test its accuracy, you also want to make sure that it's set up for the ammo you've got. Now, be that hand loads you've done up, be that factory or whatever it is, but the grain versus the twist. Obviously, it's the correct cartridge. But also the grains versus the weight of the bullet versus the twist of the barrel. There's no point running a 90 grain projectile in a 1 in 12 twist 223. It's not going to stabilize, it's not going to be accurate. It's as simple as that. It's not made for it. And you can go through that. This isn't going to be a catalogue of all the exact details, but make sure that that's appropriate. I'd also tend to go through, and if I'm going to test accuracy of a rifle, that's what I want to do. Then I want a decent level of ammunition. A decent quality, not the cheapest stuff. Don't go and find yourself the cheapest stuff and then try and judge the rifle on that. Get some decent stuff to start there. You might end up using the cheapest stuff, but if you want to see how the rifle is, yeah, listen, spend a little bit more on the ammo to start off with, just so that you know that thing's going to be okay. If you're not fussy, doesn't matter, but if you are going to be fussy, give it a reasonable chance. Okay, so you've got the right ammo, it's all done up. You're setting it up in a form that you're going to be able to shoot it reasonably accurately. So that means you haven't got high mirage, you haven't got high wind, you're not sitting on a rickety bench. You've got something reasonably stable in reasonable conditions, and then you can go and judge how it shoots. The next details that goes into this is that a lot of the problems I see are people that are going up through the range. They're going up. So they've been shooting a 223, they've been shooting a 6mm Creedmoor, they've been shooting a 243 or a 308 or whatever it is. They've been shooting a moderate range, or even a lot of people were actually talking about is they've been shooting a 22 rimfire and a 22 long rifle, and now they're going into their first centerfire cartridge. And in that format, I suppose you can end up a little bit lazy and still shoot really well with a rifle you're used to that is a lot lower power, where your recoil control, all of the stuff you've learned to do, suits the rifle that you did have. Now, that may be really good form, it's going to work everywhere, but a lot of cases it turns into where all of a sudden I've gone from, I had my 260 Remington or my 6.5 Creedmoor or whatever it was, and that's shooting that really well, and I set it up like this and I shoot it, and then I go and get myself hunting rifles to do a bit more sort of stuff. I want a bit more power in my rifle, I want to do this, and it's a 300 PRC or a 300 Win Mag or something along those lines. So not just a Magnum, but it's also shooting a reasonably heavy projectile. And then I just can't make it shoot. A lot of the time, sometimes there's other details which you'll get into, but a lot of the time what's actually going in there is the shooter's recoil control. The way you shoot is not actually very sound. It works fine when the rifle doesn't do very much, it isn't moving around too much, and all your form and all your follow through and everything works there. But the moment you get hit with something that all of a sudden has some more bump to it, then the rifle starts moving more, and your good behaviors turn into bad behaviors because they don't suit a Magnum. So that's not uncommon. Actually learning how to shoot the Magnum actually then is a different thing, and that actually then tends to transfer back to the other one, and you shoot the other one even better once you marry it all together. So that is super relevant to how that works. It also is another key ingredient which you touch on, which is this all turns into, is actually the moment it starts to shoot badly, it messes up your confidence. And confidence is one of the key ingredients to really good groups, to really accurate shooting. Confidence is what it's about. The moment you see a couple of, people call them flyers, I really hate the word, it means you missed, so, and you're trying to blame something else. The moment you see something that's too far away from when you're aiming, then all of a sudden that's a little chink in the armor, or maybe it'll just go away, do it again and it's like the same, then there's a confidence thing. So then trigger pulls aren't quite as smooth, there's more tension, there's more trying to force things and make it happen. And that's one of the places where you'll see a lot of comments to say that, oh, the women shoot a lot better than the men. No, listen, all good shooters shoot really well. Doesn't work on what gender you are by any means. What it is about is that when you start trying to force things and you start to muscle things and your tension builds up, that can mess things up as well. Back on with the rest of the story, that's one of the things that can happen. A big step up in recoil can actually change accuracy for rifle quite a bit. And yes, I'll say it again, said it many times before, the recoil does affect accuracy because the bullet hasn't left the barrel prior to the recoil starting. So any movement starts to show up on paper, even though most of it happens afterwards, it starts to show up before. So recoil control is really important. Follow through is very important. If your finger's doing something on the trigger, you're yanking, you're moving, you're twisting as you're pulling the trigger, that will affect things because of the after movement. No more obvious than in the likes of a slow 22 round, where you'll actually find that recoil control is one of your biggest things that you have to have really good. Your not recoil control, your follow through, your trigger follow through is really, really important. But it is the thing that all starts to change once more bang starts happening. So that's one of the things that can go into it. The next thing, the other things are really obvious things before we get into all the problems that could be there that you can look for without any real problems being there. If your scope's tight, you've got decent trigger control, you've got and follow through, you've got decent recoil control, and you've got a decent platform, everything's shooting pretty well, you've got the right ammo, all the rest of it, everything's what it should be, but you can't get a good group. The next most obvious thing and most likely thing is your parallax isn't set up properly. You do not set parallax by rolling that side lever or the front one backwards and forwards and finding where it's focused. That's not how it works. That might be a guide as to where you are, but then you've got to move your head around. Once again, videos on my channel as to how to check your parallax. Setting it, yes, moving it backwards and forwards, but move your head around behind the scope with the rifle fixed. So it's sitting still, move it around and see if that reticle is moving on your target, on where your actual crosshairs are laying. If that's moving around, your parallax isn't correct. Then move it, and regardless of the focus, move that until you get that where that parallax does, the crosshair doesn't move around. When it doesn't move around, that's a pretty good clue. You can probably right there leave it there and then adjust your actual focus, your diopter focus, or the focus on the lens that's next to your eye. Move that around till it's all nice and clear, everything's clear, then you've set things properly on that sort of score. Can be more complicated with some scopes, but the basics are check your parallax. That is one of the biggest things that causes a poor group in a new setup, because it's not set properly and people have literally burned out barrels trying to figure things out, and it's their parallax side of things that's the problem. In some cases, this is another thing with a new scope you're not familiar with. If you've said it was good, and then you've shot a few shots and you've got it's going all over the place, check your parallax again. Sometimes the parallax will move. It's a thing inside, it's moving lenses inside the scope. If there's something going on there, you may have to roll forward and roll back to get it to sit still. There's all sorts of different things you might have to do with your particular scope. Generally it's not an issue, but what I'm saying is check it after a few shots, check and see if the parallax is still okay. Move your wire around again. If it's moved, okay, it's not a scope I would like to use, but you need to work how to work out how to manage that. So parallax, really important thing. Beyond that point, the other thing that will cause groups to go wrong with a new rifle, new setup, is if it's really got a bad group, check your muzzle device. Make sure it's not tagging. Make sure nothing's touching up at the front there, because that is something. Obviously make sure the rifle's safe and all the rest of it, and then look at it in that fashion, but check that it's not tagging, it's not touching, there's no little bits of copper or anything through that muzzle device. A muzzle brake, a suppressor, anything that's screwed on the front there, if that's just touching, that can cause a terrible group. The other thing I would tend to do with a new combination is after 2 or 3 rounds, double check that sort of thing. Double check that stayed tight. There's nothing loose, that sort of stuff. I do the same thing with the scope and that sort of stuff. Just keep an eye. Generally, if you've gone through and checked things thoroughly, that's not going to change. But if you've got something that's actually not fitting properly, then it can change only after a few recoils where the guns had to shake up and done that sort of things. Okay, so that's that. We got to that point. Let's say we're still having an issue. At that point, you've pretty much done it all, but there are some other things. And part of this you could have checked at the beginning, but it's generally at this sort of stage you're going to start looking for finer details. What are the other things going on here? If it really does start moving around and you do have a bad group at that stage, you've got the right ammo, all the other bits and pieces looking good. The next thing that tend to go through is put a bore scope in it and look at something and look inside the barrel, because there must be something weird inside of it. In truth, I've seen some terrible barrels that still shoot well. Yes, you can have issues with if it's not all centered up properly when they chamber it. That can cause issues. Even that tends to be sort of remedied. The amount of jump it's got, all that sort of stuff. So different ammo trying to select in there is one of the things that people do, is just try and find the right ammo to make my rifle shoot. And there are all sorts of nuances that go with that. With some rifles that are particular, means that the way they're set up, the bullet isn't traveling out quite as nice to the lands. It's not quite as central. In most cases, they can jump up to 300 thou from the bullet release to touching the lands, and that doesn't really cause an issue. You still get very accurate rifles. The actually timing that and setting it up, which can change things, is more about lining up with the nodes and the harmonics through the barrel and that sort of stuff. And listen, if you've got more than an inch group or an inch and a quarter group at 100 yards, there's something else going on. The finer details, it can be there, and it depends on barrels and that sort of stuff, but not generally an issue. Damage up and down the rifling in that side of things, unless it's really scoring the bullet up and making a horrible mess of things, then generally it doesn't really matter. It sort of goes through, it'll run out. Some barrels take some more. They'll take 20 or 30 or 50, or I've heard of 100 rounds before it all starts to settle down. Well, that's possible. The most likely thing on a barrel is the crown. If there's any damage, once again with a safe rifle, but if you look there, if it's nice round end to the tip of the muzzle, it's nice round in there where you can see the crown comes away from it, in whatever form, whether it's a hunting crown where it's a protected carry, where it's got a little radius inside there, it's nice and curved, or it's a target crown where it's dead straight and pulls out. It should be even. If there's a chip, if there's a chunk, if there's something missing, an irregularity there, then that is of a concern. That's something that does need to be addressed. It doesn't need to be replaced, but it does need the crown recut on it. And that's one of the other finer details that can move into sort of the weird stuff of bullets to barrels and the different combination of things. In some cases, the likes of a hunting crown, which has got more of that convex, it's more likely to be fussy with a boat tail bullet. You put a flat base bullet into it, it'll come out of there a lot nicer. You'll get a better group out of it. Once again, this isn't talking about fixing a 3-inch group and turning it back into an 1.5-inch group. This is more like fixing an 1.5-inch group and turning it into a 3/4-inch group. But that is about matching it up. The long boat tail in a hunting crown, which is more likely found in a lever action and that sort of stuff, is not the best match. Most of the centerfire hunting rifles you're getting nowadays tend to have a bit of a hybrid crown, where it is a bit of a target versus a bit of hunting, so it's protecting itself, but it's still got a decent release for the bullet. But that tends to be a nuance we're talking about. Crown is very important, but I'd have to say on that sort of stuff. Another thing that's important is just for confidence, but it also affects accuracy, is your trigger. Follow through, like I said, is very important. But if you have a 6-pound trigger, trying to get a really good group with it takes a fair bit of experience and skill to be able to make sure your finger's in the right place. It isn't just a case of click it and it's going to happen, because there's more going on. There's a lot to this. Fairly obvious stuff, but it's something to keep in consideration. When you've got this rifle, it should shoot like this, but it's actually you're pulling off only a 2.5-inch group, but you're having to deal with a trigger. Listen, factor that in. It is the nature of a little bit your form can fix it, a little bit your trigger control can fix it, but that the trigger coming back down into a range, or appreciating what it is. And I suppose that is part of the same as that Magnum or the larger caliber. You're stepping up to all of a sudden there's a lot more recoil. It's the same thing going on with that trigger. It comes down to you learning some of that stuff. So I think I do have a little list over here. Listen, that's basically the bits and pieces. I suppose I want to finish on that one there with the different bullets. And people talking about a different bullet to make them shoot properly. It is sort of an accepted standard that and I think it really comes more from the 22 long rifle, that different bullets make rifles shoot differently. And I'd have to say yes, but only in a very small degree if everything else is right. Features that can actually be wrong, and I should finish on that first. Another feature that is quite commonly wrong in some very, very good rifles. So some of the wonderful woodstock rifles, safari rifles and that sort of stuff, beautifully finished. All the wood matching up to the steel so thoroughly. Everything is such a nice look. That's a nice look, but it isn't inherently accurate. The thing with the way an action works in a rifle is that you want, when it's actually going to the recoil process, when it starts that, you want it to behave exactly the same way all the time. So as it mates, bang, it comes back there, there's one thump as it hits there, or it's sitting on it, all pushes together. With something where you've got lots of surfaces that are very close to touching all over the place, if they're perfectly very close to touching, that's fine. Dead even all over the place, it's always going to do the same thing. The moment you get a little irregularity where it can touch here, or it can touch there, or it can touch here, or it can touch there, and so a slight movement, particularly in a wood stock, or particularly in a stock, less so in a chassis, but it can happen there as well, is that each time it shoots, it actually has a different point of the action that's pushing on, can create a very different, well, point of impact, above all the other things you can talk about, whether it's about how the action moves, or it's how the harmonics of the barrel and all the different things can cause it. But if it is always hitting in a different place, shot to shot to shot to shot, that will cause an issue. So in some cases that takes some very clever stuff to make sure you have a very nice clearance everywhere, or filling it all up, whatever it is to make it even. That is, once again, much more in, there are some really, really beautiful rifles that don't shoot very well, and it's actually the beautiful trying to make everything really close together and really nice fitting all over the place between the action and the wood that cause this slight different impact all over the place, or slight different behavior because of the different point that it pushes on each shot, that can cause an issue. It also affects very much when there's different air, different moisture in wood, that sort of stuff. The wood, although not much, has a tiny different swelling, and it means it pushes in a different place, and you get a different point of impact. This is all about actually, it can happen in the cheaper stuff as well, but is particularly about getting everything very close. Whereas if there's nice clearance everywhere and just a nice bedding place that it pushes on, it becomes a little bit simpler and not a concern. And I suppose that's where I'd have to leave it. The summarize all that sort of stuff there, the rifle's bolted together properly. It's basically set up with a free floated barrel, basically the trigger's working properly, all that sort of stuff, the scope's bolted down, all that sort of stuff really matters. The parallax is set up properly. The ammo suits the rifle in the various ways that needs to work. The particular ammo to make it shoot a little better, listen, there may be a little bit, tiny bit in that sort of stuff, but largely if you're over an inch and a half group with pretty much any rifle, there's something else going on. It could be you. It could be the fact that this rifle is not being shot the way it needs to be shot, and you need to change that little bit to learn it and understand it. That is something that really happens. They don't just work by themselves. They are something that we need to drive, and we need to drive them properly. Then you go into the finer details of bedding of actions and of the exact setup with whether it's hand loading or all the other bits and pieces. Yes, there's always stuff there. Very, very particular on the rifle and that side of things, but largely I would say that if you've got something that is shooting in that under 1.5 MOA, probably under 1.25 MOA, then it's in the subtle details you're going to find it. Certainly that little mark in the middle of the rifling and the barrel, that sort of stuff, yeah, listen, that's generally not going to cause that issue. And I would work on the other things first. I'd go through and do the form, do the other bits and pieces. Parallax is a real key. Like I've said it a few times because it is a real key. Listen, I suppose beyond all that, all said in the video, listen, I hope it makes some sense. I hope it helps some people on that side of things. Sure, you've got lots of stories to go with what you've been through, what you've seen. Leave them all down below like normal. And other than that, listen, thank you very much for checking in, and we'll catch you next time.